Why millennials are the middle children of Hollywood. Hello friends, I'm Cal Barnes. This is Unlimited Creation, and today we are going to take a look at the paradigm shift. All throughout Hollywood history, all the way from the early 1900s up until the mid 2010s, Hollywood has been in the old studio system model. That means that distributors and studios controlled the entire pipeline of media content. The birth of the internet was really the beginning of the seed that would become the tree that is the democratization of content. But it was just a seed, and all the way from the 90s through the 2000s, the studios still had full control. There were some benefits to this. One of them was that it was the height of the studio system, and they had really perfected the art of studio filmmaking. Also, because they had control of the eyeballs, they were able to justify the very large budgets and funnel all the attention into just a few mediums, mainly theatrical, television, and physical media, that is Blu-ray and DVD at the time. Because there were no real other outlets of competition, the studios and exhibitors and distributors had full control over this pipeline, and the profits were exponential. Really, the two main companies that were the beginning of the paradigm shift were YouTube and Netflix. YouTube was the beginning of users being able to create content on their own from home and upload it to the internet. Right there, that introduced competition to the traditional models because now there were things to watch online that weren't controlled by the studio. Although that took a while to reach fruition because filmmaking equipment was very expensive back then and therefore still inaccessible to the average person. Also, phone cameras and consumer cameras were really poor quality and therefore posed very little threat to the traditional system. It was around 2012, 2013 when the DSLR camera came out. These were cameras like the Canon T2i and other prosumer cameras that were mainly for shooting high quality pictures but could also record really high quality 1080p video, but it was still complicated and difficult to shoot on, and very few people had access to it. But in comparison to what was before in terms of cost and quality, it was extremely affordable and technically in the right hands could produce incredibly stunning cinematic low budget films. Some of these films are still my favorite of all time, and many films shot on these DSLR cameras were what inspired me to become an independent filmmaker when I was acting in Hollywood. I was seeing actors get together with their friends and shoot films on these cameras. One such film that really inspired me was Scoot McNairy's In Search of a Midnight Kiss. I was living in Franklin Village in Hollywood at the time. They even shot around there, and watching this movie and watching what they did on a budget of, I believe, $27,000, and how far that film went and what that did for Scoot's and the rest of the people associated with that film's careers was super inspiring. As an actor that moved to Hollywood in 2010 to pursue my dream in the traditional model, that is what I saw happening from the actors from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, this was also very disruptive to that process. It was around the time where YouTube also started to gain more of the market share, as well as Netflix for streaming, which is also disrupting the financial model. So as these new technologies were coming, as the studio system was getting disrupted, it was also stressful for young actors as they saw the model that made many of their idols and the people they looked up to very successful. As they saw that disintegrating around them, it was also very stressful and made times feel uncertain in terms of what the path was to make it to the top of the mountain. I was right at that time, right at the end of the 2000s when it was the very, very end of the peak of the studio system where they had full control, and right when YouTube and Netflix began to gain more and more of the market share and the content was strong enough that it began to take many eyeballs from the studio system. Then right behind me, and also right behind us, Gen Z was coming. As a millennial, I was the first generation born with the internet. I remember dial-up when I was in junior high, getting on dial-up at my house and at my grandparents' house. But I was the first generation to experience it, but again, the internet at the time was not very strong and practical for anything really other than having a MySpace page. Still, video games and films, the traditional model, were dominant. Then right behind us is coming Gen Z. The new model is YouTube. These are creators, these are influencers who were born with high quality, high speed internet and devices that can produce high quality 1080p and 4K content at the touch of a button easily. These are kids that are used to living their lives online and are already coming up in the new model and don't have any attachment at all to movie stars or to the old studio model. For the most part, they care very little. They are all about creators, YouTubers, and influencers, and they are gaining more and more of the market share and more of the power, and they are actually in power. As of this year, Gen Z has taken over Hollywood in terms of who holds the clout. Filmmakers like Curry Barker and Kane Parsons have shown that audiences care more about them and what they're doing than what studios are doing by voting with their time, money, and energy. This is the first year where the paradigm shift has truly shifted and Gen Z is officially in control of Hollywood. Where do millennials fit in? We are the only generation in Hollywood history to be right smack dab in the middle of the old studio system, which was from the entire time Hollywood has existed, from the early 1900s till the mid 2010s, and Gen Z, which has more or less been gaining more and more of control from the mid 2010s to 2026, where they now hold the majority of the power. So as Gen Z moved into prominence, they ushered in the new studio system, and that was just officially born into existence, and the power has officially swung this year. So, where do millennials fit in? Here's my answer, and I think many of my contemporaries and people that I work with who grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, who are very attached to the old studio model. It has been a very inspiring but also frustrating time when you see the literal death of everything that you hoped and dreamed for when you were a kid and when you moved here, when you were literally just seeing that disintegrate before your very eyes every year. Now, I'm grateful that I've done a lot of self-work and I'm no longer attached to that idea of that's how things are going to be. I know that because I'm speaking to you right now on a show and podcast I created, which is very Gen Z and didn't even exist when I wanted to move to Hollywood to be just an actor. Just the fact that I'm doing this shows that I have fully embraced the new wave and the new paradigm, and to be honest, I love it. I understand what Gen Z is all about, and I really understand the draw to connect directly with an audience and have no gatekeeper standing in your way, telling you when or when you can't perform, telling you what or what you can't create. I see why Gen Z love this, and I am fully on board, and I am fully embracing it. Honestly, more power to this new system. It's awesome, it's roomy, it's inclusive, and like in all things, including the old system, the cream will rise to the top regardless of what system it is. Talent and hard work will pay off, and it doesn't matter if it's in the old system or the new system. What I love about this, though, is that it really gives everybody an opportunity, and you just don't have to be rich or be in Hollywood to have a shot at having your content and your art seen, and that is good for everybody. That said, where do millennials fit in? I just talked about how it could be difficult when you're attached to the old model, and also, on the flip side, millennials, we didn't grow up with the internet, we didn't grow up in the new model. So essentially, we were a little bit behind because we have one foot in the old system and one foot in the new system. And a lot of Gen Z creators and filmmakers who just started that way, they didn't spend a decade plus or 5, 10, 15 years in the old system while it was crumbling. They just started in the new system, are ahead of us. Yes, that does sound very difficult, and I won't lie, it has put me in a very interesting position in terms of where do I fit in the whole economy. But keeping a solution mindset and solution-oriented, embracing change, this is my best idea on where millennials fit into this. So the benefits that we bring is that we are classically trained. We understand traditional filmmaking, acting, writing. We have an appreciation for the history of Hollywood that, no disrespect to Gen Z, many of them don't. So when it comes to working in the system, because still studios provide a lot of funding, they provide a lot of money, they provide a lot of backing, and they provide a lot of clout, and they still hold a lot of status, they will appreciate that. And also that craft, that appreciation for the art, that training goes a long way when it comes to actually being good at acting, filmmaking, and writing in the arts, specifically in those crafts. On the other side, not being fully, completely saturated by the old system and set in our ways, we are still at a position where we are young enough to be able to change and evolve with Gen Z and go where they are going. We can support this movement by garnishing them with our traditional talents and helping to guide them by being the bridge between the old system and the new system. That's really what I feel like where I fit in. In fact, me and Curry Barker were not much different. We're bridges between the old system and the new system. Curry Barker went to film school. He went to New York Film Academy. He's an actor. He's a writer. His dad is a screenwriter. He produces his own content. So he has a lot of appreciation for the traditional arts, for filmmaking, for the craft of screenwriting, for acting. He is very much, although he's a decade younger, he's very much still rooted, his craft is rooted in the traditional system, and that's why I think the film obsession ended up being so good. On the other side, and this is where him and I definitely differ because I'm just starting creating and he's a very established creator, is that he had been creating his own sketches, making his own content with his friend for years since he was at school, and he built up his own YouTube channel. He built up his own audience, and therefore, regardless of whether or not studios want to continue to work with him and hire him, he's fully independent and not reliant on the studio system saying yes. So, in terms of where we overlap, I'm very established in acting and writing and creating with the traditional art forms, and yet I have an open mind and I'm a lot more experienced in creating my own independent content. I've produced an independent ultra low budget film at a budget that the traditional Hollywood system can't even comprehend. Our entire budget of my first film is 10% of a catering budget on a studio film. Hollywood and the traditional model cannot comprehend it, but me and my team did it, and that's what makes us very Gen Z and new wave oriented in our work ethic. So, where do millennials fit in? I can't speak for everyone, but for actors and writers and filmmakers out there, you are the bridge between the old system and the new system. That is where you fit in. That is what we can offer. We can bring the traditions of the old system and use them to support creatives and to create in the new system. And we can honor what we've learned, and we can honor what's been created and the shoulders we're standing on, as well as supporting the new generation in their work and also guiding them in an appreciation for the crafts of acting, writing, and filmmaking that we so loved and we so longed to be a part of when we moved here. Yes, the traditional system is crumbling and it can be difficult to watch, but there is hope, because when you see films like, I'm just going to use Obsession again as another example. Here's a film that was made by a Gen Z filmmaker with new actors on a very, very, very small budget by Hollywood standards, and yet Focus Features, a traditional distributor, picked it up. It went through the traditional channels, blew up at the theaters, and that is where Gen Z has met the traditional system, because the 100 years of infrastructure that these distributors and these companies have created, the relationships they've built, the pipeline that they have created, and the sheer ability to get a film seen globally is to be respected and to be appreciated. It is something that Gen Z and the new wave of filmmakers will scoff at their own peril. Like Jason Blum says, I love independent film, but I hate independent film distribution. Honestly, that is one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard, and from my experience, it couldn't be more online with the truth. The traditional system, as of now, still holds the prestige, and they still hold the ability to get a film traditionally distributed and in theaters across the globe. And unless you're making a film and you want it to be seen just on YouTube, nothing wrong with that. I have a film on YouTube, but I don't want every single film I make to be released on YouTube, and I doubt Curry Barker or any other YouTube filmmakers want that as well. So, unless you want every film that you ever make to be released directly online to your audience, if you want to have a film in theaters appreciated and recognized in Hollywood as a traditional feature film, you must continue to have appreciation and respect for the traditional systems while creating incredible projects with the new technology and the budgets that you have access to. Just to recap, you have the old studio system, you have millennials and then you have the new studio system and Gen Z, and millennials are the bridge between the old and the new. Thank you for tuning into Unlimited Creation. I'm Cal Barnes. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, and until then, be the bridge.